One of the things I know is that the church is a microcosm of the larger society. And unfortunately, what impacts the world impacts the church. One of the sins of this nation is the enslavement of Africans and the system of racism that was instituted after slavery was abolished. The system of racism gave birth to whiteness and the white privilege, which are at the heart of the divide and the injustice that exists in American society and in the church. In light of the present state of affairs in America, where Black and brown bodies continue to suffer injustice at the hands of law enforcement, laws, policies, institutions, and the church, we gather today to begin an open and honest dialogue about how we work for racial in our unity. To help in this discussion today, I want to introduce those who have come. We have Pastor Pedro Trinidad. He is the associate pastor at the Carmichael SDA Church in Sacramento, Sacramento, California. We have Tracy Berg. He is the senior pastor of the Fairmont SDA Church in Lodi, California. We have with us as well Bob Mason. Bob Mason is the senior pastor of the English Oak Seventh-Day Adventist Church in Lodi, California. We have Tyler Kraft. Tyler Kraft is the senior pastor of the Tracy Seventh-Day Adventist Church in Tracy, California. We have with us also Pastor Willie Johnson. He's the African American Ministries Coordinator, the Men's Ministries Coordinator, the Inner City Ministries Coordinator, the Prison Ministries Coordinator of the Northern California Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. We have Marlene Rodriguez Woodson. She is she's the associate pastor of the Grace Point Seventh-day Adventist Church in Rockland, California. We have with us also Dr. Jim Lorenz. He is the ministerial director of the Northern California Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. We have Mark Woodson. He is our president, the president of the Northern California Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. And we have the Right Honorable Dr. Ricardo Graham, president of the Pacific Union of Seventh-day Adventists. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the discussion. Welcome to the conversation. Now we want to begin. And what we're hoping to accomplish, and I really want all of us to be able to speak, to speak from your heart, speak honestly, and let us engage in this conversation that we hope that will be the beginning of something great, something that will transform our lives, our churches, and our nation. So with that said, let's go around it. Well, let's start with the question. What are the ways and what are the areas in which we see racial injustice in America and in our church? Well, don't all answer at the same time, so make sure you're unmuted your mic when you're ready to speak. We have hundreds, probably thousands of people watching and listening, so please, the reason why we're here conversations, so please come in. And in what areas, please,
answer is go.
Members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That I think is more of an issue, but so that's harder to see in my book.
Mr. President, let me just chime in quickly. And you said, I mean, in terms of systemic racism within Adventism, I think one can easily see that there's structural racism within our denomination, and I will illustrate that by pointing something out. You have Northeastern Conference, a regional conference that has 57,000 members. In terms of representation, they get to send one person, one president to represent them at a higher organization because representation is based on structure. You have 14 white conferences that have a combined membership of 54,000, but they get to send 14 presidents to represent them. So you have the structure itself allows for greater representation of one group above the other. And because of systemic issues, Northeastern doesn't have the financial base and backing to split and divide into several conferences, whereas in these areas, the finances is there, so they're able to have the structure that gives them representation. That's a form of structural inequity. I may dare say structural racism. I may venture to say. You could disagree. I mean, maybe some might disagree with my assessment, but let's someone else.
Pastor Peters, could you indicate to which meeting those 14 presidents are going?
So the North American division, they're going to the North American division, and that's where decisions are made that impact the work in North America. So therefore, you have one person representing 57,000, but you have 14 that are showing up to represent 54,000.
So there's one person in that category, but the numbers are also determined for the lay people who are represented based upon the numbers in that particular conference. So there is some numbers that justify or balance that out, so that the Northeastern in their lay people would have more than the other conferences in their lay people. Right. But there is, I think that, I agree that there are places where racism resides. And if we go back, like Dr. Woodson said, how do we define that? If I may, I think that we all are born with a bias. We grow up with a bias in our nuclear family. And then we may be taught prejudice and the extremity of that bigotry and racism. And then we experience that. We have a support system that supports that as we grow up. And unless there is a significant experience to those people along the way, it's difficult for them to see that they are a bigot or a racist. The ethnocentric process that we go through, and of course we know that the enemy's at work, and so he wants to divide people of all races and ethnicities rather than have people banding together against him and against unrighteousness. And so I think that there is, through individual personification and by groups of people, the presentation of racism. We may want to re-examine the structure and see how we can make some changes. I go to to represent the union. I have 220,000 members in my church. I'm the only one who represents them from the Pacific Union in some meetings. And a smaller union has the same number, has one person as a president who goes. So I think we can examine that. There are some places where that may be justified. And I do know that there are racists who have their hands on the levers of control throughout the world and in the Adventist Church.
But even with that, that structure is not based upon a racist system. It's not based on that. I mean, because one could say in the structure that we're talking, now we may talk about Adventist structure and the lack of representation. That could be that's probably a different discussion, but I would dare say the system and the structure itself is not built to disadvantage another group, one or the other, in my opinion, just looking at it, because just from the illustration that was just given, Dr. Graham happens to be an African American representing more than just African Americans. I'm probably in the same boat, right? I'm representing the Northern California Conference. It's not a regional conference. It's not a Black conference. And yet I represent a conference that the majority in the conference are what we would consider white or Caucasian. And now that we can have a whole discussion about how we even label some of these things within our conference. But so it's just, you know, that one's a little bit harder for me to see as systemic. Now, that's not to say that we have not had some issues systemically in the past, and there are probably some still holdovers. I think one of the first things as we talk about in the church, I believe, because I don't think we've done this, I believe as a Seventh-Day Adventist Church, there are some things that we need to apologize for because of what has happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have people talking about we have people today talking about doing away with the regional conferences, not recognizing they are the legacy of racist attitudes that brought them to bear. It wasn't because African Americans said, hey, you know what? We need to just have our own and separate ourselves from everybody else. It was the majority culture that said, you will never have a seat at the table. You will never be able to run anything. And it came as a suggestion from the leadership of the General Conference and the North American Division at that time that said, it was their suggestion. You ought to have your own organization because you'll never have a seat at the table here. So those are the things that I think we can look back and say, there are some things in our educational system. I'll give you one example, then I'll be quiet. When my mother was going to go to, this is not that long ago, when she was going to transfer from Oakwood College at that time, I think it still might have been a junior college. It may have just been a senior college. She was going to transfer to Union College to do nursing because Oakwood didn't have a 4-year nursing program. She was allowed to enter into Union College based upon one thing, one condition. If she could find an African-American roommate. So these are the things that I think that when we look back at, I think as a church, there are some things that that they were policies that we had. That's systemic, that we need to apologize for.
Let's bring Jim Lawrence in. Jim Lawrence, you have the floor.
Thank you, Rudy. I think, you know, we talked about how do you define some of these topics.
We're not on Facebook. It's not.
And if you define it as structural,
thank you.
One of the challenges we see is you can have one church, like for instance, my last church I was pastoring was a decent sized church, a lot of professionals. And with that, I then compare that to maybe a smaller church, maybe predominantly Hispanic or a smaller African-American church. They don't have the financial base. And so we do see an inequity sometimes with, you know, some of these churches. And I'm not to say there aren't, you know, small Caucasian churches. I pastored one of those that didn't have much of a financial base either. But it can be a big challenge if you're inner city trying to do some of these ministries and not have that same financial base. And that, you know, I don't think it's intentional. I think that is one of those things that structurally it can be a challenge.
Pastor Peters, can I say something real quick? Can you hear me, Pastor?
Go ahead, Dr. Graham.
I should have said thank you, Dr. Peters, for assembling this group. I think that this is a very powerful opportunity that we have amongst the pastors in the Delta area and others. And I'm very grateful for your courage to pull this together and in such a visible format on the internet. Some people may be marked for the rest of their career based on what they say on this. But I will thank you for pulling us together. In 1999, the North American Division, and I'm old enough to have been there. I was secretary in Northern. In 1999, the North American Division had its first summit on race. Al McClure was the president of the North American Division. It lasted for like Thursday, Saturday, Friday, through Sunday, something like that. And it was a very interesting experience for the very first, and it has not been repeated in the division. And the point that I want to make is that we have not talked with each other about this issue with courage and forthrightness. And one of the reasons is that there is a lot of emotional baggage pent up, and sometimes it bubbles out, and it comes out perhaps in inappropriate times and ways, but it is there and it has to be dealt with. At the end of the meeting, Elder McClure, who's now deceased, he was prior to being North American Division president. Some of you remember he was Southern Union president, and he preceded Elder Bradford as North American Division president. At the end of that particular meeting in 1999, Elder McClure verbally apologized to all Black people in the North American Division for what they had experienced. Now, that was long before streaming and live broadcasts, et cetera, et cetera. When Al McClure said that, the late Al McClure said that, there was a heavy pall that came over the room. Everyone was silent. No one, it was the first time Black people told me that they had never heard a white Adventist apologize to a Black Adventist for any of the injustices experienced in the past. And so as we talk about these injustices, we have to be mature enough as an organization, those who are in place, to say, yes, this is a problem. We apologize for this. And I'm very happy to see Pastor Rodriguez on here, because the track of racism runs along with the track of sexism. And when we deal with one, we have to deal with other. Thank you so much.
Right. Let me bring in Pastor Gregory Johnson, and then I'm going to go around the room so that everybody can come in. So Pastor Gregory Johnson.
And yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Dr. Lorenz said. There are policies that we may have. The intent is not racism, but they disproportionately affect Black and brown people. So whenever you have a distribution of resources based on finances, that's going to disproportionately affect Black and brown people. I read a stat that said that the wealth gap is so severe in the United States that it takes 11 Black families to add up to one white family on average when it comes to the wealth disparity. And the idea that we're going to put everybody on equal footing when it comes to the distribution of resources, that's unfair to Black and brown people. And I think one of the causes of that is not necessarily racism, but is trying to superimpose a capitalistic economic system when God designed the church to be socialistic. Because that's what happened in Acts chapter 2. We put all the resources in one, and those who had need, those are the ones who receive. So I do think that even though the policies are not racist, they have that effect.
All right, let me go to Pastor Tracy Berg. Pastor Tracy.
Yes, Doctor.
You could weigh in, Pastor Tracy.
You know, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me and all of us to this meeting. It really does promote an opportunity for listening and further understanding. And already I've learned so much about things that I was unaware of, you know, as far as different policies or different ratio numbers or these different things. And I'm really sorry for what many of you here on this panel have faced in the past, how things have been. And I'm hoping that conversations like these here today will help us to work together for just a better, brighter future for all of us serving God. You know, I know in our church at Fairmont, it originally was a German church for quite some time. I mean, for years, decades. And then in the past, I think it started a little bit before I came. And I and Pastor Tyler, when you were at Fairmont, we had an opportunity to team together and do a lot more multicultural activities and also special Sabbaths to bring an opportunity to honor several of the different cultures that have been cultivated in our church family. And I think one of the opportunities that I had was when one of our church members came and said, "Hey, Pastor, let's have an African-American history Sabbath. Let's have a Black history Sabbath. Why don't we have that?" I said, "You know what? Let's do it. Let's have it." And I think Dr. Whitson, I think you were our first speaker that we had that year. And then I think several of you actually spoke too. Dr. Graham, I know you have spoken as well as Elder Johnson. And it's been an amazing experience. And then our Hispanic family members, our Hispanic church members, "Hey, let's have a Spanish Sabbath." Like, "Hey, let's do it." And so here we are in a once predominantly German church having a service, not quite completely, but almost completely in Spanish. And so then we also had a German Sabbath, and we had an international Sabbath. We have some Asians in our congregation and others as well, multicultural. And what started happening at our church was it's become much more relevant to a multicultural family of God in the heart of downtown Lodi. And what it has taught me is that, we all have a seat at God's table. And we all can have much more as we grow and as we work together. And one thing I realized too, in the light of the George Floyd tragedy and the other tragic experiences that people have been having over the last 2-3 weeks is, I started talking with more members and just saying, "Hey, how are you doing? How's it going?" And at first, several of them, "Oh, I'm doing okay." And I said, "No, but how are you doing in the light of several of these tragedies that are happening?" And a lot of my members, a lot of my African-American members have opened up to me and have shared with me what it's like and what it's like for them. I want to give a shout out to all of them. I want to thank you. I want to thank you, members, for opening up to me, because I don't know what it's like. I haven't really experienced very many types of racism. I grew up in a multicultural family on my mom's side. We have several different cultures in our family. We have Caucasian, African-American, Indian, Hispanic, Filipino, Middle Eastern, Japanese. And so it is a huge multicultural family gathering that we enjoy each other's company. So I grew up, I guess what I say this teaches me is that even though I grew up around a lot of multicultural family and multicultural friends, I didn't quite understand what they may face in life that I didn't. And so a group like us coming together here today helps me understand what my brothers and sisters are going through, experiences that I've never been through. And my heart breaks and hurts. And I want to say that I'm sorry for all that any of you and all of you out there watching have gone through. It shouldn't be that way. With Jesus, it shouldn't be that way. And I'm looking forward to all of us coming together and coming
Excellent.
together as a family. Thank
you, Pastor. Let's get Sister Marlene Rodriguez Woodson in the conversation. Unmute yourself.
Unmuted.
Okay, there we go. I mean, Mark and I have talked a lot about some of this stuff, but I think I want to go back to this issue of structural racism. I don't believe that our church has intended policies for that. However, my experience going through academies and going through college I felt very, what's the word? Well, I felt like I was treated different for my last name because I was not Caucasian, and I had a registrar tell me that I would never graduate from college and that I would only work at Taco Bell. And then I get to college and I had my advisor say, you know, I don't know why you come to college. You're only going to be a secretary. And so while I don't believe that the structure was meant to do that, I think what has come to me is that because these actions have gone unchecked, because no one ever said to me, hey, this experience that you had, you can actually go talk to someone. It has felt, my high school experience, my college experience have felt as though because of the last name, I wasn't going to be treated equal. And so I appreciate the conversation simply because when we don't talk about it, when we don't address the issues, then that's when it can feel like the act of racism is only happening to you. And so, I mean, you know, I feel like we just need to keep talking about it and have these hard conversations. I feel that our schools, my nephew who graduated from an academy, 10 years ago, was told that he could not speak Spanish in his academy because the teachers could not understand what he was saying. This was just like maybe 10 years ago. And so I feel that, yes, I think there needs to be some sort of education that needs to be talked about and that needs to be promoted within our own institutions, because it can feel very isolating. So yeah, I mean, that's what I would say about this conversation, is that the more you talk about it, as hard as it can seem, that's when it all comes out and you feel heard. I mean, most of us just want to feel heard. It's not that I need you to change give me anything or recognize me. I just want to be heard and acknowledge that, yes, this happened. And I apologize. And our church hasn't been all that great about apologizing, at least not to me, you know? And then we won't even touch about just the sexism that exists in our church. And I don't want to get into that, but, you know, I just appreciate the conversation. And I hope as pastors, we ask these questions more and preach about it and speak about it from a biblical perspective, and how Jesus would react, what Jesus would do, and what does he require of me? So.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. Let's bring Pastor Bob Mason into the conversation. It will be Bob Mason, then Willie Johnson, then Tyler Kraft, and then sorry, it didn't come out.
Well, he's suddenly a rich man now.
Bob Mason.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, yes, you're good.
All right. Well, I believe that as followers of Jesus and as Seventh-Day Adventists, we are highly advantaged for a conversation like this. I was moved this morning to talk about the sin of racism in the church, which is often so unconscious, and I'm so thankful to God that I was able to set up that conversation, that message, with the truth that there is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. That Jesus did not come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And what poisons conversations and makes them almost impossible to have happen is that people are so afraid of condemnation. People are so afraid of guilt, be it white guilt or any other kind of guilt. With the grace of God, we are able to take that out of the equation. And we're able to have freedom to talk about how things really are. And so what I have found so helpful to be able to be free, mainly to listen, is to be able to take out of the equation any need to be defensive, to defend myself or to defend anyone else, because the thing that sets us free is truth. And no matter if it's comfortable truth or uncomfortable truth, because we know that our salvation is not on the line, we can listen and we can learn and we can grow. And it's been such a blessing to me. Thank you, Tracy, for sharing that. It's been such a blessing and a help to me to just listen to people's experiences and have no need, a lot of us have an instinctive need. Oh, we've got to defend our law enforcement officers. Well, while you're listening to someone talking about their experiences, no, you don't. You can just listen, because the goal of your listening is not to sort out who's right and who's wrong. Your goal of listening is to find out, what was it like for you? What was your experience? And I believe that the more that we do that, what happens, I believe that particularly today, the structures of racism are not all gone, but they are diminished from what they were, in some ways very significantly. Inside the church, of course, it's a debate. Some people feel like regional conferences and specialized churches are some kind of structured racism, and they don't understand what they were designed to meet, what the situation was before that they were needed, that they remedied. The regional conferences, I understand the tipping point was when it became undeniable that the racial climate in the Seventh-Day Adventist Church cost a woman her life in the Maryland, D.C. area. And people said, there is no way to fix it from inside. We have to create another structure that makes things equitable and fair. And so with the structural aspects diminished, as has been discussed here, a lot of what's left is the instinctual aspects, which still contribute to the structure. And our instincts are formed, of course, by what we've been taught, and they're informed by our experiences and by what we are aware of. And if we will listen to each other, I believe not only can our behaviors be informed, but our instincts start to get the message too. And we're able to have a healing on that instinctual level, where the instincts that cause people's first response to be guarded or fearful based on the race or some other characteristic of the person that they are encountering, that God is able to heal and inform those instincts so that they become more righteous, more fair, more open, more loving. The message I shared this morning was about the cleansing of the sanctuary by Jesus. And I believe that our message as Adventists about the cleansing of the sanctuary in heaven and the parallel cleansing of people on earth is a very telling experience, because the goal of Jesus' cleansing of the sanctuary every time was that the house of God would be a house of prayer for all people. And you see, the thread in Jesus' life was to eliminate every barrier that got in the way of someone who was trying to come to God, of someone who was trying to obtain his grace, his favor, his healing, his mercy. And racism in the church is a barrier that stops people from finding that experience in us and with us.
Excellent.
We got to talk about it.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. Pastor Willie Johnson.
Yeah, thanks for Doc inviting me into this crucial conversation, and I agree with everything that's been said thus far. Growing up in Southeast Louisiana, I saw racism from the time I was born. I came into the world, and I dare say in the church today, it exists. But I see an opportunity for reset, to reset some things. A lot of our policies, a lot of our issues that we are having with policies that impact us negatively, I don't think are necessarily intentional, but it is systemic. I just want to share a little story with you quickly. When I went to Southwest Adventist College at the time, in 1991, they had their first Black History Month celebration. And a mentor of mine, professor with 4 doctorates from Austria, I won't call his name, but he had a landmine. He said something that was offensive to people of color, to Black people. And so, being an older student at that time, he came to me and he said, "Willie, what did I do wrong? You think I'm racist?" I said, "It's not a matter of what I think. It's a matter of how you acted and portrayed yourself in the moment." I said, Doc, you have 4 doctorates, but you need to be educated on what myself and other people of color, Black people, have gone through or going through. And we see the same soup warmed over more often than not. And then it's swept under the rug. Nobody deals with it, as Pastor Marlene was saying. We can no longer afford to do that. I think we need to begin to dialogue not only with one another as pastors and administrators, but we've got to dialogue with our young people. I was blown away a couple of weeks ago by a young lady, Kennedy Mitchum, 22 years of age, out of Missouri. And she challenged Merriam-Webster dictionary to change their definition of racism. She said this. She says that racism is not just people believing that other people of color are inferior because of their color. But she said this: racism is prejudice combined with social and institutional power. It is a system of advantage based on skin color. We've got to deal with that. We've got to listen to not just ourselves, but our young people. She went on to say, I have kept having to tell them that definition is not representative of what is actually happening in the world. And she said this to CNN. She said the way that racism occurs in real life is not just prejudice, it is the systemic racism that is happening for a lot of Black Americans. Well, it continues to happen. It happens in the church. And now we have opportunity to reset, because all of us have been cultured into racial biases and prejudices. And we have to admit that. We've got to have dialogue with each other, because if we don't, it will disproportionately continue to impact people of color, the work of God, and people will begin to call us out. They are calling us out already, because we profess to be people of the book. But the book says, he has told you, oh man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God. What would Jesus do? Those are questions that even us in the Adventist Church need to begin to ask ourselves. It's one thing to preach the gospel, but are we living it? Are we portraying it? I heard your message this morning, part of it, Dr. Peters. I've been listening at each of your messages as I can. But to be honest with us, I'm guilty. Not so much of racism, but not speaking out against it when I'm confronted with it in the church or in society. Prior to this meeting, I was marching in Fairfield, as we did in Stockton last week. It's time to say something. An injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. And if it's in the church, then it needs to be dealt with. We need to have a conversation, and we need to change policy if need be.
Excellent, excellent. Let's bring Tyler Kraft into the conversation. Tyler, could you unmute yourself? Yes, there you go.
All right. Do I need to put on Medea makeup or?
You're good. You're good. You're funny.
I've enjoyed, being a part of this conversation. I've really, as I think Dr. Graham said, as we began, that a lot of our understandings come from our unique context, where we grew up, our environment, our family environment, our church environment, our community environment. And I know we all come from different places, have different experiences. And so I think this is why it's vital to have conversations, because there is a tendency, I think, for all people, but perhaps especially well-meaning white people, to assume that our experience is normative, that because we might not see color, because we view everyone on an equal level, that our experience has been their experience. And so it has been easy for us, I think, especially in the Seventh-Day Adventist Church, at least in the recent eras, the recent generations, to think that racism is a thing of the past, because we have addressed some of the systemic problems. And so we've let, unfortunately, this disease just continue, to fester, and in large part because these conversations are uncomfortable. There is a high degree of difficulty. One misword, one misstep, one ill-spoken word has a problem to open up, huge cans of worms. And so we've just, I think, taken perhaps the easier route of keeping it at arm's length, of not addressing it. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of our members have taken on that mindset as well, as just, hey, the gospel is one thing, and racial politics or politics, anything else, is another thing. And this has caused, there to be a tremendous divide in mindsets and in approaches. And I think this is a powerful opportunity that we have, especially as pastors, to have these conversations, as difficult and as uncomfortable as they might be, because we need to help expose this virus to the sunlight. We need to have these conversations, and our members need to see us having these conversations with each other, and we need to have the conversations with our members as well. I think that for too long, we have been comfortable, at least those of us that have had the ability to remain comfortable and to be comfortable, have taken advantage of that opportunity to do so. And to finally have this moment within our lifetimes, within our opportunities, within the spirit of the age, so to speak. It's vital for us to have those difficult conversations. I know many of us have started to speak on racism, on injustice, on inequality. Hopefully we've started before, the past 2 weeks or so, but especially within these past couple of weeks, we've been granted the opportunity, I think, to take advantage of this moment that we have. And we need to do so, because we cannot remain silent. As pastors that want to see the good in everyone, as pastors that want the good for all of our members, we need to see that as a church, we have the ability to be a model for the onlookers, and if we hope to have a healing in the broader society, we need to facilitate that healing within our church. And as Ellen White said, there's been several Ellen White quotes passed around recently, but I found this one in particularly to be poignant. She says, "Every false religion teaches its adherents to be careless of human needs, sufferings, and rights." And I believe that we cannot fall into that category. We cannot, either by our silence or by our inaction or our diverting action, continue to be careless and mindless of the human needs, rights, and sufferings of our brothers and sisters. And so we need to take advantage of this, or we fear the potential of fading further into obscurity, to be unmasked perhaps as a false religion that doesn't care about the needs of everyone that bears the image of our Creator.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Thank you so much. Let's get Pastor Pedro Trinidad in.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. Hey guys, thank you. I'm glad to be among such a group of pastors, both male and female. And boy, where can we start with all of this? A lot has been said already. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, in a very minority neighborhood. Dr. Ricardo Graham, shout out to Detroit. Mostly Hispanics and Blacks. And so that's how I grew up until the age of 10 when I moved to Puerto Rico. When I moved to Puerto Rico, I was considered the gringo because I spoke English. And so it wasn't so much of a racial thing, it was more of a language thing. If you're able to speak English well, then you're treated differently. But then others hate you for doing that. So, but I could say that everywhere I've gone, I've been pretty much been respected or been treated okay. At least that has been my perception as a Latino. Probably in the church is where I began to sense the difference. Not that it was very bad, but when I pastored in New York, I wanted to pastor a Spanish church, and I realized that that was never going to happen because the person in charge of choosing Spanish pastors was of a different country, which will go unnamed. But usually it felt like they were bringing all their friends from that country, and all of us who were educated in the United States, Spanish-speaking students, were thrown into English-speaking churches. And it was very clear to me that I would never pastor a Spanish church. So, and all the Puerto Rican pastors were in English-speaking churches because we could speak English. So I came to California, very different, ethically. Actually, I realized that in New York, it's kind of crazy. Everything says New York is a certain way, but I felt that the church was warmer in New York. Got Caribbeans and different people from that country, from those countries, come to California, and you have Mexicans and Salvadorians, and I thought they're not as friendly as the ones back east. So what happened here? I thought we were all the same thing, but that was me getting into a different culture that I was not. I didn't have a lot of information on. And when you hear things about illegal immigration in the on the West Coast, I just remember Puerto Rico Dominicans trying to get to Puerto Rico, but never saw it from this perspective. Anyways, in California, here I would say that bringing people from different ethnicities and races together, as in the experiment of Concord International, of which Pastor Mark and Marlene have been part of, and now Jim Lorenz. Trying to bring different races together and to worship together. And when you have more than just, racial differences, you also have linguistic differences. Man, is it hard. You're almost like the referee trying to keep everybody at peace. And you try, and it's, one group misunderstands the other, and or they always see something wrong with the other group. So it's a hard work to do, to be able to do that. One of the things that I, as a Spanish pastor here, I would always say, why can't we work together more? I was trying to get pastors and other churches to work together, especially when Spanish churches are usually struggling and they don't have economic benefits that other churches have. And, after I left Lodi, and then Tracy and Bob decided to work together with the Spanish church there, I said, I missed it. I didn't get to experience that. But that's part of me. I like to connect people and groups together. And it's not easy. But I having to think about how can we work together. That's kind of like my mindset. I never saw it as in terms of black or white or Asian, as long as we can work together for the kingdom of God. And so I guess that's what I'll start with here today.
Thank you, Pastor. Now you understand the challenge of bringing 10, 11 preachers in the same space. It took us an hour. It took us an hour just to go around the room. It took us an hour just to go around the room and just hear a first statement from all of you. I think what I heard coming through was an acknowledgement of the fact that we do see instances and places where racial injustice is still present in the Seventh-Day Adventist Church and in the wider society. And we didn't really, I mean, most of the discussion was centered around what is happening in our church. But yes, we do, and we need to be careful how we define racism. I think Elder Johnson, Willie Johnson, gave us a really excellent definition, because one of my struggles was that sometimes when I talk with my white brothers and sisters, their understanding of racism was purely personal prejudice. And I had to challenge them and say, no, you got to go beyond. That's, I mean, yeah. Racism is way beyond prejudice. It's systems and structures that are in place that make it so. And so as I contended earlier, and which is strange, because in the conversation after, I mean, I'm hearing all the ways in which racism is played out in the educational arena. And if you go in the secular sphere and you see the way racism is played out, even in the American electoral college system, that was a system designed to disenfranchise people of color as they get engaged in the conversation of voting, because of the fact that they were concentrated in certain areas, and therefore if you stretch the power base in such a way that it dilutes where they are and empowers other areas. So even as we talk about on the back end how we see the outworkings, but I got the sense that we were not willing to go to say that our structure needs some work, because I still contend that our structure is the primary place where racial injustice happens within the Seventh-Day Adventist Church. I still contend that it is the place where decisions are made, where policies are created, and I tell you why I say that, because with this present arrangement, even if our white membership, because right now, if our white membership drops to 20% of the North American division, based on the present structure, you will still have a disproportionate amount of representation of white in Adventism just because of structure. And so that's something that I want to challenge all of you to talk to. Now we only have another half an hour, so here's what I'm going to ask. What are some of the ways in which we can work together to bring about racial equity in the Seventh-Day Adventist Church and in the world? And some concrete ways that, and a part of the conversation, I think, is that we have to be honest to have these conversations. We have to be honest, and not just the conversation, but the conversation about our history. We need to recall our history and our particular relationship to injustice. I mean, and when we begin to engage in that tough conversation to see how we arrive at where we are, who benefited, who oppressed, who oppressed, and we begin to say, well, there are some things that are present today that are as a result of what took place in the past. So the question I'm going to pose now is, what are some of the ways that we can work together to bring about racial equity, first in the Seventh-Day Adventist Church, and number two, in our wider community? Dr. Graham.
Thanks, Doc Peters. You know, you're right. You get a bunch of preachers together, it takes a long time, but this may be the first of several, just, yes, you know, I mentioned, of conversations. One of the things I always think of the macro micro type of a view, and I think that it's better to start small and grow large. So one of the things I found out when I did my dissertation, I asked, I took it wasn't a evaluative, paper, but I did take a sampling of 10 pastors, 5 blacks and 5 whites. And I asked them the same set of questions. And one of the questions down the line, it wasn't the first question, was, did you as a pastor ever preach that racism is a sin before your congregation. And it was exactly divided. The black pastors all said yes, the white pastors all said no. So there has to be a level of education.
Yes.
That all of us are potentially the co-conspirators of Satan in the racist plot. And we have to, examine ourselves. One practical way, I think it's great that pastors are talking to each other. Most churches are very silo operated. You're doing your thing. You don't know what's happening. If there is one thing I've observed when I was in Northern California, in any city that had more than one church, none of the churches worked together. None of the churches worked. Didn't even have a Sabbath school picnic together. So I think that those micro levels. Another thing is, I think that in terms of education, we need to, for example, for the, Mark Woodson knows this, Dr. Woodson knows this, that we have a president's council at the union, and once or twice a year, I buy a book and I give to these ladies and gentlemen and ask them to read it. I talk about what's in the book. Well, we did at Northern when I was president. We had a director's meeting where we had books, and every monthly meeting we would assign a chapter to a person, or rather we met every week, and each person would lead us through a chapter. So I think that we have to educate people in various ways as to what racism is, how it operates, what's the long track history of racism in the country, and how it has been manifested in our church. We touched on the fact that a lot of people think that Black people pulled away. Well, we Black people, I wasn't there in 1944 or whatever, but Black people asked for equality. They asked to be equal. It was denied. We did not ask for regional conferences, and I worked first in a regional conference. It was foisted upon us, and so we said, okay. And the model we used was actually used in the United Methodist Church when the Southern Methodists and the Methodists rejoined. They said what to do about the colored people, and they created the Central Jurisdiction, which was a regional conference from the East Coast to the West Coast. Our model took that and broke it up regionally, and then had black people. You can read about that. It's out there. But that is an accommodation. We need now to go beyond an accommodation, as Dr. Peters said, and we need to see if there are really some places where racism resides. And racism only has power if a person gives it power. Racism doesn't exist out there by itself. It is owned and operated by human beings. And unfortunately, there are some human beings who have not been victorious over race and bigotry and that type of thing. And so we need to see it and say it. Thank you.
All right, Pastor Johnson, Gregory Johnson, unmute yourself, please.
Gotcha. Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, real talk. Okay, I'm just going to be open, honest, and I'm glad that our two of our Lodi pastors are here, because a lot of my people have been hurt by Lodi. I'll just say it. I'll say it. I have accomplished people who grew up going to Lodi Academy are wounded to this day because of it. All right. I lived in Lodi for 10 years and I moved to Stockton. People asked me, why did you move to Stockton? I moved to Stockton because I felt safer in Stockton. And I pray that all of us can make it a practice to call it out. It exists. There are people who are in your churches who educated the people in my church who are now wounded and don't even want to step foot in Lodi. And an acknowledgement of that would do wonders. Just acknowledging that, that would do wonders. And the second thing I would say is for all of us, no matter what the sphere of influence we have, to assess every single policy to see if it's an unjust policy, whether it's on the church level, conference level, union, whatever the sphere of influence we have, to really address those issues and to look critically at what we do and how we're doing it. And is it unjust to a group of people?
Thank you very much, Pastor Johnson. Pastor Mark Woodson. So raise your hands as soon as you're ready, and I will acknowledge. Okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate the words. I want to just make sure to reemphasize. I think one of the things we have to do is what we're doing today, and to broaden that discussion and continue to have that discussion. I'm not so sure that we have ever, as a church, especially as a church, I know we haven't as a nation, we've not as a nation ever really dealt with racial reconciliation. So it's not even a matter of just standing and speaking out against racism. I think as Christians who are Seventh-Day Adventist, I like to say it that way, I think we have a higher standard even than that. And it's not about being tolerant. It's actually about embracing. That's, if we really want to go into the steps of where Jesus would have us go, it is going to be uncomfortable for those who are considered the minority, as well as those who are considered in the majority culture. There are some things I believe that Jesus is calling us to that are totally uncomfortable for us. And this is an opportunity for us to be countercultural, because that's what we're called to. And I'm not saying it has to go in this order, because I understand our history. Even the fact that we can buy in ourselves to racial differences, that's not, even the concept of racial differences is a legacy that's been given to us from this world, not just this nation, because it happened a long time ago. The concept of race is even a made-up construct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's really only one race, it's the human race. So the concept of race is a made-up construct that to me is from the very pits of hell.
Mm-hmm.
So to call that out, and then so we as a church can even move beyond that to even start talking about those kinds of things, then just the separation that we have among ourselves based upon that. It's not like a language, right? It's not a language that we need to go to this church, we need to go to that church because of language. It's simply because of the vestiges of what has happened to us. So when we start to move in, I believe as a church, we've got to start moving into the category, not that we don't see differences, because I think there's a beauty in diversity and perspective. So we even have to be careful in our language. The other thing that I think we have to do, I think those of us who are in ethnic minority, I think, and this is a challenge for us, I think we have to extend a lot of grace. And here's what I mean by that, because I heard somebody even say it today, and maybe it was Pastor Tyler, and that is being careful of the language, right? All these things. I think that there's some times where I have to be gracious when I know my brother or sister is not meaning ill. They just may be misinformed, and that's okay. So you have individuals who are afraid to talk about race because they're scared to say, well, I don't know if I should say Black, or if I should say African American, or I should say people of color, right? So I think for a person who is considered Black, which makes no sense because I'm not Black, right? The color. Come on, let's even think about the colors. Jim Lorenz is not white, neither is Bob Mason. I don't see white. I know what white looks like. It doesn't look like them. So we have bought in without even paying attention. We bought into these notions of Black and white because the world has given that to us. And yet there are differences in terms of color and whatever else. But if we can really go in another direction when we start saying, we are one people of God. There is no Jew, there is no Greek, there is no Black and white in Jesus. And together, whatever seeks to divide and tear things down, we will together as one race of one people of God speak against those things. And not just, so I'm just saying as a Black person, who is an Adventist, who's a Christian Adventist, I want to be able to extend grace when we have these conversations to say to someone who doesn't look like me precisely or come from the community that I come from necessarily, to say, that's okay. Listen, let's talk. You know, don't be afraid to have that conversation because you're my brother, and I know that you don't mean it toward ill will. That takes a lot for us to do that because I know a lot of us, having grown up, many of us are, you know, we just, as I tell Marlene sometimes, you know, there is this angry Black man always trying to get out, right? Because of things that have happened. But the grace of God and the blessings of God and the transformation power of the gospel needs to begin to transform me as well, and to be able to extend that grace to others. So that's
okay. Appreciate Dr. Mark Woodson, Dr. Woodson, and just want to just drop one thing in terms of the need for reconciliation. I mean, at the heart of reconciliation is the belief that there was a time when the two were together, and if the two were never together, there can be no reconciliation. And so I, you know, probably just kind of work through that a little bit. But the whole idea of deconstructing race, because race being a social construct, and that's the work that needs to be done, and understand whiteness is not about pigmentation so much. It's about the powers and the privileges that are assigned to whiteness. And so that's the place from which people live. It's the power that is associated with that.
Well, you may have to the reconciliation may have to go much further than yeah, because yeah. you can go right behind the Tower of Babel to get reconciliation.
Fair enough. Got you. Whose hand was up? Let's get Bob, and gentlemen. You're gonna get 30 second bites. Okay, Bob.
Okay, so I just want to respond to Gregory, and I want to say thank you for telling the truth. I really believe that that's how people heal, that's how people repent, that's how even the opportunity for reconciliation happens. And I want to tell you, first of all, I don't know if I have a right to apologize for anybody, but if there's any way that an apology from me could represent other people in the Lodi community, I would want to pass that along. But I want to say that God is moving today in our worship service. For the first time, I did call racism a sin by name, and God led me to tell a story that was told to me by one of our, actually that I witnessed, that I was right there when one of our members had a friend visiting him who was African American. Our member is African American, has since transferred out of our church because of reasons such as this. And his friend, we were talking with someone else. I don't even remember who it was, but they looked at him and they said, "Oh, you must be from Stockton." And my friend and I, our eyes met. I mean, our member, our eyes met, and we talked about it later. And it's these, and the fact of the matter is, I have no conviction that the person who said that meant it harmfully, but intention isn't all that, because it's effect that makes the difference. And the effect was what it was. It was hurtful and it was racist, and whatever was going on in their heart, whether they knew what they did or not, the effect was made. And this is the call that I feel that I'm sharing with my people, is that we need to go beyond saying, oh, we don't have an overt racist policy. Oh, we don't have any of those old racist signs that make people feel uncomfortable. But we are responsible not only to do no harm, but we are responsible to reach out and to do good, to build bridges, and to make sure that people are welcome, not just to make sure we're not doing anything unwelcoming, but to make sure that we're opening doors, that we're building bridges, that we're reaching out and making sure, as we said today, that everyone who comes feels safe and welcome among the groups that we call together. To me, all ministry is local, and the structures are built on local people in local relationships. And as we affect people locally, then we will affect the structures.
Excellent, excellent. Pastor Trinidad, you want to jump in now?
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, and that is when I was in Spanish pastors' meetings, one of the things that kind of would irk me were baptismal reports and tithe reports, because they would say, we've baptized so many people this quarter, and our tithes are so much. And it was almost as if we were almost justifying our existence all the time, because we had to have those baptism and our tithe dollars were never enough. And we're always fighting for more full-time employees. It felt like our own pastors had to be pastoring 3 churches, 2 churches, and one pastor even pastored 4 churches at a time. And then you look across the divide and you see other pastors that their churches are not as large, but yet they are pastoring a solo church. But since they have more money, they're kind of subsidizing the Hispanics and the other churches. And it would always bug me is that sometimes the minority churches are the ones that are baptizing, and we're like, okay, we praise you, you're doing good, yeah. But when you ask for something else, like we need more support, then it becomes a problem. So that is something that the answer is, well, the Hispanic churches are not tithing enough to justify that, and it's like, okay, so is this about the money or is this about the kingdom? And those are the things that we may need to work on.
And Pastor, that's a really significant point, because I think that's the place where structural racism in the church gets its power from, because you've seen growth among Hispanic, you've seen growth among African Americans, and you can't have structure because you don't have the financial backing. Whereas on the other end, you'll have a white conference that has 600 members, but they have the money. And they could become a conference with a full structure. But you have a conference of 57,000, and you say to them, your finances is not strong enough to split into 3 conferences. For example, if we look at the World Church, you have places like in Europe where you have a division is about 3,000 members, and you have a mission in Africa with 168,000 members. Sometimes the issue becomes how we allow money, instead of allowing the mission to say, here, churches that are growing, we need to fund them. We're saying you don't have the funds, therefore we will overwork you, and so that you're covered for that. Okay, let's bring in Tracy Berg.
I just want to say, first off, to Brother Greg, and I echo the words of Brother Bob. I don't know if I have the right to apologize for people in Lodi that have hurt your church members or that have hurt you, but I'd like to say I'm sorry for what you or your church members and your church members have experienced in Lodi, whether it be in the school or whether it be in the community. And with saying that, I'd like to just say personally, for me to you, you coming and accepting an invitation to preach in our church, at our pulpit, means all that more to me now after hearing some of the pain and some of the hurt that you and your church members have experienced. Before COVID came, we were talking with the ministry team about coming and reciprocating, and then COVID hit, and then everything just went, I don't know where it went. We were at home, but we'd still love to come down to your church as well and be a part of things there. Awesome.
Definitely.
And
let's bring.
If I could just say one thing to you, Doctor, you were ministerial coordinator of the Delta area. Shortly after I came, you transitioned
many years ago.
Role. Yeah, and then you transitioned away, and then you're back again. I'd like to thank you because it was during that time where you planted a seed with us there in the Delta area about doing things together, about going to people's churches and preaching at people's churches, or about having a big rally together. And Bob, Brother Bob, I want to say thank you to you too, because you reached out to me and you reached out to Victor at the time, said, hey, we're in Lodi, let's do stuff together. And here we had Lodi doing stuff together, Elder Johnson and pastors of Stockton coming together, doing stuff together. and then with Brother Winslow and that Delta era convocation, that has meant so much to me personally as a believer, and coming together in this time right before the COVID pandemic, that we could all come together and engage. And Dr. Woodson, thank you for being there, and Dr. Graham, and several of you were there. Many of you were there, and it just meant a lot to me, because I look back on that during that pandemic, that we were all together, and I'm looking forward to that again. So thank you for being a part of that journey.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So this will be final round. We may go over a little bit, but I'm going to go to Marlene. Then Pastor Woodson.
I think one of the things that I've been I've been thinking a lot about, and in order for, I think healing comes when we ourselves as leaders look at our own personal biases, our own prejudices, and really check those. Because I don't know that we can lead our congregations to a healing if we ourselves don't even recognize the prejudices and the biases that we have inside. And I think that's when healing happens, when we ourselves can just reflect, God, what areas do I need to let go of in order to move forward? And so I would challenge us to really just take that time to talk, talk with God, or even just talk amongst each other where we're comfortable, and say, this is how I feel, and process that to be able to let it go. Because, everybody's been hurt. We've all been hurt somehow, some way throughout racism, directly, indirectly, some more, and some a little bit less, but nonetheless, we're all broken. And we have to recognize that we're all broken. We can extend more compassion when we realize where we've been and where God has pulled us out from, and how good God has been to us. So I would just challenge us as leaders to take it on for ourselves, and then teach our congregations about what healing looks like, and how having these conversations about racism and being honest about how we have experienced it, but also, some of the stuff we carry inside that we don't really talk about.
Thank you, Pastor Rodriguez Woodson. Let's take Dr. Lawrence. Chime in here, Dr. Lawrence. Everybody will get a final go around.
Right. Well, we'll try and keep it brief. I do think one of the things, as I've talked with or viewed Facebook posts and talked with a few other individuals, is, especially in the white community, there isn't a recognition or urgency always for this issue. I've seen some posts that minimize this. They see the police action, okay, that's bad, but they don't understand the systemic issues. And I think this is where it becomes very important for these conversations that we have with each other. And I think that becomes important for those of us in the Caucasian community or other communities to talk, but also to talk with amongst each other like this conversation is, but to have them even in private one-on-one conversations, because it's enlightening. And I think it's only by talking together, understanding, and then encouraging to get past the indifference. Because then, it's very easy for individuals to say, well, if I wade into this arena, I don't want to be in politics, I don't want to do all this stuff. And, I know it's an age-old issue. Ellen White talks about it, about the indifference. And that has continued on through civil rights with Martin Luther King Jr. and others. But that indifference still exists. And it's one of the things we have to deal with, I think, partially through education and partially through encouraging further dialogue.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Lawrence. Who did not speak yet? Pastor Johnson, Willie Johnson.
Yeah, I just want to leave us with some counsel that I've gotten from 3 mentors throughout my 6 decades and a half. One was my father, who passed away in 1973. But he always said to me, son, never become what other people are. Be who you are and be true to yourself, and be the best person that you can be. The other one was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who I grew up with, listening, to him as God used him. Hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that. And it takes me to what Jesus says in John 13, verse 34 and 35, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another, that you also love one another. And by this will all men know that you are my disciples, if you have loved one for another. And finally, I go back to my mentor, Dr. King, and I share this with you. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Tyler?
I think that, to paraphrase something that Martin Luther King Jr. said, that laws can restrain the heartless, but they cannot change the heart. And as ministers of the gospel, we are charged with presenting the grace of Christ, the truth of the gospel, which is something that can change the heart. And so while it is imperative for us to make sure the laws are just, do our best to make sure the systems, both secular and within the church, are just, we need to use our literal pulpits, use our ministries to do all that we can to help the gospel take root in the hearts of our members, so that their hearts can be changed, so that the systems will be not just adhered to in a legalistic manner, but in, that they are lived out in the hearts of our people, because that's really the only way that we're going to have the lasting change, I think, that we all want to see, that we need to see happen, both within the church and without of the church. So we need to be intentional about the words we speak, our actions, the sermons we preach, so that we can say we've done our part in partnership with the Holy Spirit, as the Spirit works on the hearts of people and brings about the change that is so desperately needed.
Thank you very much for sharing. I would want to give Dr. Graham and Dr. Woodson the last word. If any of both of you, I want to give Dr. Woodson, you get to give a last word. Do you have a last word?
Yeah, I'm going to be careful how I say this, but I do count it. I want to say something good about our church, and one of the things is that we are one of the most diverse churches in this country and in this world. And to me, that's a strength. That's the beauty, and that's a strength. Are we perfect? No, but that's a strength. And then something specific about our conference. I can tell you that, hey, I can't speak for, I don't know everybody's heart. I don't know everybody's experience. But of all the conferences in the Pacific Union, the Northern California Conference, to me, modeled early on with all of our faults, but looked at leadership. I mean, we're the only conference that has had 3 African Americans as president of this conference, not to mention the number of conference secretaries that we have had. We were the first, and we've had the most. And I just say, having gone through every part of this conference, literally every part of this conference, I know that we have people who are of goodwill, who have, everywhere I've gone, and can I just be honest with you here? There's some places I've gone, I said, oh, Lord. When I got there, I said, oh, Lord. I think they know me by name, but they don't know me by face. And I've got to go in that church and preach. And I've gone to that place and have been as welcomed as a brother as anywhere else. I don't know what's in people's hearts, But I know my own personal experience with this conference. I think we have some really great people here. And I pray that we'll continue to be as open-minded as we are and continue to embrace each other as we are. But I feel a privilege to work with all of you and also to be in this conference.
Thank you, Doctor, for sharing. Dr. Graham?
Thank you, lady and gentlemen, for this opportunity of dialoguing with you. The time has gone very rapidly. I've learned many things. I've been reminded of some things that I've been old enough to forget that are still true. I believe that the Seventh-Day Adventist Church is the church of Bible history, of prophecy. I believe God is moving through this church to accomplish something that cannot be accomplished by any other denomination. And if that is so, certainly the Seventh-Day Adventist Church is a special target of Satan. And he has infiltrated and he has left his deposit that has wrought ruin, hurt, and damage inside of our church. Some of us don't realize that we have been cooperating with a nefarious person, a being, to do the will that is not aligned with the total will of God. The mandate to really love as Jesus loved must transcend all barriers. And it must result in unity of purpose and goal, even though we may operate differently to achieve it in different areas. I'm very hopeful for the world because I look at these demonstrations and I've never before seen the numbers of Anglo people marching, carrying signs to support the cause of Black people. This is an amazing time. All throughout the world, people are mourning the death of George Floyd and marching with Black Lives Matter signs and down with racism. It is a plague all over the world. I believe we as Seventh-day Adventists have a unique opportunity, and thank you once again, Dr. Peters, for assembling this group of august people. I thank you for my invitation to join. There's much more that we can talk about, much more that we can do, but I think that there are glimmers of hopes, not necessarily with the current generation, but with generation of people coming on who see clearly the evils that we have allowed to be permeate amongst the church. And I want to say this very, very, very directly. I am very grateful for the non-Black people who've joined this conversation.
Amen.
We will need you to speak in places that we don't get admitted to. We will need you to support us as much as you can, and we know that you will pay a price for it. There are people who have levers of control in churches who don't like you preaching the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, including a condemnation of racial disparity and ethnic discrimination. However, you must teach it and preach it. You must not only teach what Jesus would do, you must do what Jesus did, and be as wide and embracing. And we will support you as you support us, moving in the right direction. I believe that the Pacific Union Conference is perhaps the most diverse union, not only in its membership, but when you look at the top leadership at the conferences, we have 2 African-American presidents, we have 2 Hispanic presidents, we have 2 Anglo presidents, and 1 female president. And that's unique across this division, and I believe in the world. And because of this inclusionary ideas that we have an opportunity to demonstrate something to the world that they have not yet seen. Dr. Peters, I think that you're correct. There are some policies that we need to review. And maybe as we look at them, we can talk about how they disproportionately affect people, as do the policies in the government. And I'll say this one last thing. I'm sorry. I'm an old man. I've learned a lot, and I haven't had a chance to tell it all. But let me say this one last thing. My wife is giving me the timeout sign, so I'm going to obey my wife right after this. But you know, the fact of the matter is, my son and daughter went to Lodi Academy. Our children went there, and their experience was very deplorable. Our son has determined he will never go back to Lodi Academy because of the hurtful experience he had there. Now, I do not blame the kids, because the kids are just doing what they learned at home. But the institution, the school, did not correct those things or speak against those things. And that's where I have great difficulty and problem. The people in charge allowed those things to go on and never sought to correct them. And there is where we have it seems like a place where personalized racial animosity or disappreciation lodges and then is exercised in a systemic way. And we've got to work on that. I am praying for you guys in Lodi, especially because it is a unique place in the United States of America that I can tell you some stories about. But I won't take any more time, Dr. Peters. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. Thank you. And I want to say a special thank you to all of you who answered the call and were willing to join in this conversation. And let's not deceive ourselves. This is a big work. It will not be solved in one conversation or two conversation or 20 or 30. This is going to be a lifelong work that we will all have to engage in so that we can bring about racial equity within our church and within our wider community. I want to say to you, I am who I am because of the Seventh-Day Adventist Church. So I love this church. I value this church. And so this church has taught me a lot. But at the same time, I have to be honest. And if there are things that I see that we could do better in, I think we need to call that out as well. And the idea is to make our church the better place, a more perfect union. Look, a part of the work that we must do going out from here is that we have to begin to engage in smaller circles, smaller groups, in our spheres of influence, and that we are keeping the conversation going, and that we are being intentional about having these conversations. So to Dr. Jim Lorenz, Ministerial Director of the Northern California Conference, thank you for joining in the conversation. Tracy Berg, Senior Pastor of Lodi Fairmont Seventh-Day Adventist Church, thank you for joining in the conversation. Tyler Kraft, the youngest one on the line, thank you so much for joining in. Senior Pastor of Tracy SDA Church, Pastor Bob Mason, the statesman at English Oak Seventh-Day Adventist Church in Lodi, and my neighbor at camp meeting. Thank you so much for being here. Pastor Gregory Johnson, the pastor of Valley Community SDA Church in Stockton, California. Thank you for joining in the conversation. Pastor Pedro Trinidad, and he's joining us today all the way from Rhode Island. He's the associate pastor at Carmichael SDA Church in Sacramento. Thank you so much. Pastor Marlene Rodriguez Woodson, associate pastor at Grace Point. Thank you so much for answering the call. It was late, but you said yes. I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much, Pastor Willie Johnson, African American Ministries Coordinator. Thank you, Dr. Mark Woodson, President of Northern California Conference. And thank you to my old friend, Dr. Graham, my racquetball buddy, President of the Pacific Union. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. To all those of you who joined us on Facebook and on YouTube, thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. We might not have been perfect. We might not have said all the things that you probably wanted to hear, but it's a conversation. It's an open, honest dialogue. Some things will hit you kind of strange. Some things might hit in your sweet spot, but we trust that you will continue to journey with us and go and do what you can. Go and do what you can to engage and to begin this conversation where you are. We're about to sign up, but before we do that, we'll ask Pastor Jim Lorenz. He's the pastor's pastor of Northern California Conference, and we'll ask him to send us out with a word of prayer.
Well, let's pray. Father God, I thank you for friends, that we can come together and we can dialogue. I thank you when you say, come, let us reason. And that is in the context of where Isaiah spoke of letting down the oppressed, and you forgive us for doing that. But Father, let us take up that challenge though, and not let down the oppressed, and to pick up and support them as well. And so, Father, bless us as we go forward in our own spheres. May we do what we can. May we challenge the forces of darkness that want to divide us. And Father, may we be a force of light to enlarge your kingdom here. So now we pray in Jesus' name, amen.
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 Well,
Amen.
thank you all. Thank you all. God bless you and good evening.
God bless you too.
Thank you, Rudy.
If
Thank
you
you, thank
guys, once we get off, if my folks will take us off live from Facebook, if you guys want to remain for a little bit, for us to debrief a little bit, I will appreciate that. And I'll tell you when. Let me end the recording.